So, Jim, would you like to share with us what you had?
I'll say, that I'm just trying to decide which one I want to start with. I would say that there's a doctrine there, and I was let me find the verse. It's basically that you should confess with your mouth. That keeping it bound up inside of you, not telling anyone, is probably not the right thing. You are.
So there's a necessity of confessing outwardly. What?
Right. It says tell no one.
Right. So I'm saying you should not draw the doctrine that you aren't supposed to tell anybody.
Yeah, confess to me, but at the end, don't tell anybody. But then at the end of the gospel, go and tell the whole world. So, so there's something to be said here, and I've often wondered about that myself, and I think that at the time, if he was to be proclaimed publicly that he's the Christ, that would be misunderstood. His work is not going to be understood at that time. And so to me, what I see being derived from it here is that confession needs to avoid misunderstanding. And you might confess the right words, but the context is going to give that confession a meaning, and so you have to watch out for and do everything you can to avoid confessing wrongly. And even if you intend to confess correctly, it's possible that there are settings and circumstances where that would be understood incorrectly. Okay, so that's what I see from verse 20. That's a doctrine I just derived. What do you guys think? Yes or no? Thumbs up, thumbs down? Yeah, it's good? All right. Okay, what else? A volunteer? Kurt's got his hand up all the time, but that's good. Yeah.
Preservation of the church, and there as well, the individual within the church. You can have comfort in that you'll be preserved.
Okay, so the promise of Christ's church being preserved. Okay, what else? Anybody else?
Not the complete Trinity, but certainly more than one person is discussed in this. So the Son and the Father are separate and distinct.
Right, so we certainly have a part of the doctrine of the Trinity here.
Now, what's also interesting then at the fulfillment of this in John 20, so right here, my Father has revealed this to you, and in John 20, when he gives the Spirit, then heaven is opened and also closed. So.
Darkness of human reason.
Darkness of human reason. Okay, I think there's something to be said here about revelation and what it is that whenever we confess the truth, whenever a person comes to the knowledge of the truth and is able to confess it, that this is actually the work of God that brings him to that point, that makes that possible. I think that's a doctrine that you can get from this text.
I wrote, not by my own reason or strength, kind of the third article, do you believe? And not just the preservation of the church, but also the divine origin of the church. I will build my church.
That's good. I hadn't thought about that one.
Verse 19 is the doctrine of authority.
Of the doctrine of what? Authority? Okay. Keys of the kingdom of heaven, okay. Yeah, and we call that the doctrine of the keys, or the office of the keys. But essentially, this would be church discipline. And you'd have to teach, and in the question section, you would teach against the idea that whatever you bind, whatever you loose, means that you can make all kinds of new doctrines and laws and things like this. But this is dealing with sins. And you might not get that exactly from this passage, but you would get it from elsewhere. But that too is something that our confessions make pretty clear. Okay, anything else? Yeah.
Well, I'll just throw out, so many people in my flock try to hang their hat on, do not judge. I'm not going to judge anyone else. And I think this says, no, I think we do have the, ability to condemn sin, condemn wrongdoing.
Excellent. That would be an especially important doctrine to bring out nowadays, to say there is actually sometimes the need to judge and to reject what is false, to bind what needs to be bound. Yeah.
Jesus as the fulfillment of the promise of the Messiah in the Old Testament. He's not John the Baptist. He's not the forerunner. He's not Elijah. He's not one of the prophets. He is the Christ, the Son of the living God.
And yet he is a prophet.
Yeah, there is something interesting there that they list a bunch of prophets. And so there's kind of a half-truth here in that he does have the office of a prophet. He is the prophet greater than Moses and things of that sort. So you could even start from that and show how Christ is the one greater than Moses, the one that Moses predicted.
Also in this time, it's not only that he's the Son of God, but the living God. Yeah. I know, especially I was, 30 miles away when 9/11 happened, and there were people going around saying this proves God's dead. Because of what happened. Yeah. And here he's confessing it, the Son of the living God.
Okay. Is there anything that's a little bit more obscure, that's maybe not directly stated by the words, but from the words it's right to derive a doctrine? No?
No, it's pretty obvious.
Pretty obvious, okay.
That's pretty obscure.
Okay, let's get the obscure here.
Hell has gates.
Ah, interesting. What do we make of that? I mean, what does that mean? I don't even know. What do you have, Jared?
I was wondering what the gates were too. Would that the Lord's church should be constantly expecting that the gates of hell will be trying to prevail against it, and will do that by fighting the confession of.
That's a very good point that needs to be brought up. By the fact that Christ says the gates of hell will not prevail, that means that the gates of hell are going to try to prevail. So that's a doctrine that's derived from the text legitimately. Yeah.
Gates are defensive. We often think of the Satan's kingdom attacking the church, but right, he's a stronger man who bound a strong man and plundered his kingdom, right? So Christ is attacking Satan's kingdom. He's going to prevail against it. It's not just that the devil attacks the church through its ministry is right. It's part of its work.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't want to necessarily get into the specifics because some of this I think requires more research, and I'm not remembering right now what the whole point of the gates is. When I think of the gates, I think of the place of judgment in ancient Israel, that the elders of the city sit in the gates and judge cases, but I don't know.
My idea wasn't nearly original. I took it from Peter, and he actually attributes the gates to the evil angels.
Okay. Remind me of your name again.
Ryan. Yeah. The blessedness of faith.
Okay. From what?
Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you.
So you can actually talk about what blessedness actually means. That's actually very interesting there. Any other more obscure doctrines that we're getting from this?
The gates of Hades or hell is an offensive from the Christian. The gates cannot prevail. They're slammed open by the proclamation of law and gospel, by the right use of the office of the keys. As souls or people that are held in the bondage of the devil are released, the gates of hell cannot stand closed.
That's like the verse from O Come Emmanuel. Fling open the gates of heaven and lock the gates of hell.
Oh, okay. Any other more obscure? Yes?
Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. But if you look at the Lord's Prayer, it's that will be done on earth as it is in heaven. You can't have something evil being done in heaven. So God's will is actually, it's the other way around, I would think, in terms of what's being bound on earth has to be God's will if you are in that.
Okay. All right. Good. I'm looking at my list. Some of these we've got. We've mentioned already. Okay. You had another one?
Just semi-obvious was that the church is built by Christ, but it's not a group of
Okay, so a little different than a club. How about the church consists of people who confess? So getting at what the definition of the church is. How about Peter in the singular can exercise the keys? So can we also say that individual pastors can exercise the keys? Peter, singular, can exercise the keys. Basically, I think what you see here is if the keys were given to Peter and it's singular, that's not to say that they're not also given to the whole church, but they are certainly given to Peter. And so you've got a man who is able to exercise the keys as a representative of the whole church. Do we believe that that can happen even nowadays? That a pastor can actually represent the church and pronounce the excommunication or the absolution? So I think you could drive that doctrine here as well. I think a lot of times we assume that this has to be said to all the apostles or to all the Christians. And there are other passages in which the keys are given to all the Christians or to the apostles. But here it's given to Peter in the singular, and I think you could make that into a point. Yeah.
Does he bestow the keys on Peter here? Because he says, "I will give you."
That's true. Yeah.
It's in John 20 that he gives them the keys.
Yeah.
Is this like a promise?
All right.
John's father preached on it at his ordination. So it's in Marquardt's church that here's the promise of the keys, and they're bestowed in John 20 on Easter evening.
Okay, so we've done some cold dogmatic exegesis. And I say cold because we didn't do too much exegetical work in preparation for this. We were just kind of shooting from the hip. But already we've seen that some of our insights and our derivations were quite general in nature, or were quite, maybe the text reminded us of something that we knew from somewhere else. And sometimes we were just restating what the text says, but sometimes we had some actual doctrines that are based on this text that are derived from it and are not stated in exactly those words. So I think that's good to keep in mind of the different kinds of things that happen whenever we're doing this kind of doctrinal exegesis. And now I believe it's time for a break.